Hello, I am Cyrus from Cyrus Gaming Spot, and welcome to a new type of video I am trying out, where I talk about various boss fights that sticks to my mind, and talk about how they work, and what makes them as memorable as they are, for both good or ill. From epic 1v1s, to traditional RPG style 4-on-1 fights, or even 4v4 fights. From mob fights to gimmick fights, everything is fair game. And for today's topic, I'm going to talk about the super boss from Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Simon.
My love, these foes are beneath you. You who have fought heaven and earth and subdued giants. To find me, to free me from her grasp. Would you fall now to the likes of them? Your oath remains unfulfilled. Rise. Your enemies await.
Simon is a super boss that you can encounter in Expedition 33 3rd Act, where he's located at Rinrot's Draft, which is an optional endgame dungeon that you can traverse to once you unlock the dive ability for SKA by maxing his friendship level. Simon himself is probably the ultimate test of the combat system that Expedition 33 has to offer, at least in the base game. I know there's another version of Simon in the free DLC that was released a while back, but I haven't played that, so I'll be talking about base Simon. Ultimate Test is probably an apt descriptor of the Simon fight, since he has it all. Multiple phases where his repertoire increases, varied dodging and parry timings for all of his attacks, and unique boss mechanics that makes him stand out from the rest of the enemies that you have faced thus far. The only thing that he doesn't throw at you are gradient attacks, which actually makes him tougher since gradient parries have a really forgiving parry timing. Way more forgiving than normal parries, with them being really easy to pull off. But the only exception is the gradient attack from the Counter-Sinez, where they delay it so much that it makes you feel like you're waiting at an ICBC claim center. Or I guess like waiting at a DMV for my US viewers. So even without gradient attacks, Simon has a lot. But before we get to his moveset, let's first discuss his unique boss interaction that he has. Now, dodging and parrying are major mechanics in Expedition 33. If you have played the game, you can already tell that they designed the combat system around the dodging and parrying system, and with there being a lot of good incentives to do them. It's one of the main ways you avoid damage, and if you manage to parry, you also gain AP back, which is the game's main resource management. And you gain AP proportional to the amount of attacks you actually parried. And if you parry it all, you even be able to perform a strong unavoidable counterattack. So yeah, there's a great incentive to learn the enemy's parry or dodge timings, especially given the game's high damage values on both the player and enemy side. Heck, you got various encounters that really hardballs you to either avoid damage altogether or parry so that you can do the fight, like with the chromatic Rasmir, not even giving you a turn at all until you can parry him to the point that he breaks, or with Clea, where she heals if you get hit at all. So it's essentially a key mechanic in Expedition 33. It's something you'll be practicing a lot through the duration of the game. But there are also ways the game can give you a lot of safety nets in regard to mistiming your parries, like with getting a high health pool with your pictos or stat allocation, or with getting multiple levels of shields through a combination of Lunas, or with something as rudimentary as healing or rezzing your down allies, so you got more chances to turn the tide. Now you're probably wondering why I went to this tangent about dodging and parrying, and about the safety nets you got for the two. Well, to highlight just how integral the defensive mechanics are in Expedition 33, but also due to how Simon is one of those hyper-specific encounters where the game tests you on how well you can dodge and parry. It does this not only with you having to contend with Simon's plethora of attacks and learn their dodging and parry timings in order to effectively deal with them, but it also does this with Simon himself having innate boss mechanics that interact with the safety nets that I alluded to before. So how does he interact with them? By taking them away. Yeah, your high health pool? Sorry. He manipulates the chroma around you and leaves you with 1 HP. Shields? Nuh-uh. He steals your shields. Your character is down and you're looking to res him? Oh, look at that. He removes you from the canvas. Simon pretty much looks at your safety nets and says, nope. We'll learn to parry and dodge today, boy. Now, there are some safety nets you have. You can still have the auto revive and the auto survive Lumina active, so you can at least survive 2 mistakes per character generally, but your safety net is severely limited. And perhaps the most devastating aspect to this part of Simon's kit is that these are free actions to him. Yeah, it actually doesn't cost him turns to do these. You just do these at the start and end of a turn. Now, he can't do all of these at once. He does have to prioritize which of these actions to do at a given moment. It can only do it to one party member at a time. But he does it so often that those options either become unviable or are actually detrimental, like with Simon stealing your shields. The only caveat to that is resing. Like, Simon can only remove you from the canvas at the start of his turn, and at the end of it. So that makes it that if he kills you in his turn, he technically can't off-fuel your characters into his next turn. So there is some counterplay to that, if you can res them before that. Though he has pretty high speed in his later phase, so you do need to play around with your picto and character skills to ensure he doesn't have 2 consecutive turns, if you want to make resing to be consistent if you go down that path. But at least there is some counterplay to that passive. Of course, there are only so many times you can res, given that it's tied to a resource and costs a turn to actually revive someone. So it's mostly just an option to prevent the worst possible outcome. But yeah, as you can see, Simon's passive does a lot to remove you from your comfort zone and really tests you on how well you have practiced your dodges and parries thus far, by severely limiting the amount of times you can actually make a mistake. This is especially true if you've been relying on shields in the third act. Simon is a really hard counter against shield users, man. No longer do you have a mechanic that allows you to shrug off mistakes like shields have, and this can be overwhelming. I haven't even gotten to the third phase transition, since he does a move at that point of the fight that also removes another layer of safety net that you have, but I'll get to that when I talk about his third phase. So to belabor the point I've been making, Simon's innate boss mechanics does a lot to limit how many mistakes you can make in the given battle, which really forces you to have to be on your A game in regard to learning his moveset and dodging and parrying his attacks. Speaking of his moveset, let's actually get into it now, phase by phase. Firstly, phase 1. Phase 1, Simon has about 4 moves he can use against you technically. Short combo, a powerful combo, and an attack where he plants his sword down and smacks you with his fist, and long combo. Now I say technically because he seldom does long combo in phase 1, I find. Granted, phase 1 doesn't have that much HP in comparison to his phase 2 and 3, so I usually get through phase 1 pretty quickly, but I think he also only does long combo when he's less than half health at phase 1, which might be the reason why I have never seen him do it when I play through the game, since I usually get through phase 1 through 1 cycle of turns. So I'm not really going to talk about that move since I have never seen it myself personally. I only noticed in this phase since I saw someone stream the game and saw Simon perform long combo against him in phase 1. But the other moves I can talk about. So short combo, ironically not the move that has the least amount of hits in his arsenal, is a 4-hit move where he does 2 overhead attacks, 1 sweep attack that you have to jump over, and a final overhead attack. I don't know, it's pretty easy to parry through. The attacks are evenly spaced between each other with no weird timings, and the jump between the second and third overhead attack is pretty easy too, with you being able to jump a second after you see the jump symbol. It's not delayed or anything. This is the move that is the easiest to learn on eyeball. Strong combo is a 3-hit move where Simon does 3 wind up slashing attacks against you. The attacks are a bit delayed, so you have to get used to the timing and sound cues a bit, but it's also not too bad to learn. The attack where he plants his sword to the ground and just punches you is probably the trickiest move to learn in this phase. It is a 5-hit move where most of it consists of delayed wind up punches, with the third punch coming a bit faster than usual to trip you up. You probably need a few tries to get the timing, but it's nothing you haven't seen before if you manage to reach Simon thus far. So phase 1, it's pretty manageable if not pretty easy to learn. It's just that you have less chance to make mistakes now than usual due to how Simon's shenanigans can lower your safety nets. Phase 2 is where the fun begins. Now, this technically counts as a separate fight, so any auto revives and auto survives that you might have used up in the first phase gets reset here, so you do get a bit of mercy here. Just a bit though, since this is the phase where he jumps up a lot in difficulty. Phase 2 Simon has 5 moves that he can cycle through. 3 of those moves you have technically experienced before, since he's doing the same attacks, it's just that it has a modifier to them. Again, I've never experienced long combo in phase 1, so it's really I've only experienced 2 attacks, but in theory, you would have seen those moves before. It's just Simon's put a spin on them, namely short combo, strong combo, and long combo. So what does he do? He adds a sword after image to mostly every attack he does to these moves now. I say mostly since the jump in short attack is still just a single jump, but the rest of the attacks in those moves have a sword after image accompanying them now. So that means that you have to do an additional parry after he does every attack. So short combo turns from a 4-hit move into a 7-hit move. Strong combo turns from a 3-hit move to a 6-hit move. And long combo is essentially a 12-hit move. So yeah. That does seem quite a lot, especially since it's coming right after each slashing attack that Simon does, which can be a lot to process if you're seeing those sword after images for the first time. Heck, just seeing long combo for the first time in this phase can be overwhelming. With that said, I'm gonna say something that is perhaps controversial. Is that these moves are easier to learn than you expect. Yeah, the after images does look scary, but the timing between the sword strike with an after image and all of those attacks are very consistent with each other. Which means that when you get the time between pairing a normal sword strike and pairing the after images in one of these moves, you essentially learn the after image parry timing in all of them. And once you get that done, you pretty much just have to get used to the sword strike Simon does himself personally. And you should have gotten used to those since he did those moves in phase 1 as well. It's actually pretty cool how intuitive it is to learn those 3 moves in phase 1, and then adapt and learn the after images version of them in phase 2. But let's actually talk about the one move I didn't discuss before, long combo. Now long combo in phase 2 is a 12-hit move. It's probably the toughest to parry out of the 3 after images move, just due to the pure volume of attacks you have to parry. But if you learn the after image parry timings, it's not too bad, since the attack that Simon does himself in this move are easy to eyeball, with one exception. Now the flow and rhythm of how you can parry through most of these moves in long combo is like 1-2. It's like this for Simon's first 3 attacks and his final attack, which makes sense given that you parry the initial attack and its after images and then wait for the next attack to do the same. It gets tricky when you get to the 4th slash, since Simon's 4th and 5th slash and their after image pairings pretty much come consecutively from each other. So instead of being a 1-2 rhythm, it turns into a 1-2-3-4 rhythm, with the last attack ending with a 1-2 rhythm. So the entire combo rhythm wise is like this: 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2-3-4, 1-2. The 4th and 5th slash coming so soon after each other can really trip you up, and this is one of the main reasons why it's the trickiest after image move to learn, even after learning the timing for the after images parry. But overall, I would say learning short combo, strong combo, and long combo in phase 2 is moderately challenging, but not too insane. It just looks that way. But these 3 modified attacks aren't the only attacks that Simon brings in this phase. He got 2 other moves, which are namely Sword of Luminaire and Light Speed. The Sword of Luminaire is a 7-hit move. The trickiest part is perhaps the first 2 slashes and the 5th slash. The first 2 slashes because you kinda have to parry the first slash a bit earlier than you think, and the second slash comes pretty soon after the first slash. And the 5th slash since he's doing a reverse spin to his attack, so it's a bit more delayed than you thought. Now there is a trick to the first 2 slashes since there is somewhat of a prompt that tells you when to parry it. Namely, there's this burst of energy that you see coming into Simon when it happens. So if you press parry during that burst, that'd be the parry window. The rest of the moves, you can pretty much use visual and sound cues to intuitive your way to parry them. With the 5th slash, you just need to wait a bit longer since he does this longer animation for it. Now light speed. This is Simon's deadliest attack in his arsenal. It's a 10-hit party-wide attack. It's his only party-wide attack. Okay, his phase 3 transition attack is also a party-wide attack, but he only does this once. Lightspeed, he can do it multiple times. Now the reason why his deadliest attack is that it has such a weird timing to it in regards to the parry timing. Like there are some strange delays to some of the attacks, and some attack comes a bit quicker than you think, without much indication. Like to me, the rhythm of Lightspeed is all over the place, which can make it a pretty hard attack to parry consistently until you see it enough times. And the most devastating aspect to it is that it's a party wipe if you don't dodge or parry it properly. If there is an aspect to the Simon fight that is overtuned, it'd be this move. So this is phase 2. It is definitely a significant step up compared to phase 1, with him having a lot of multi-hitting moves that you have to consistently dodge or parry, which does add significantly to the challenge of the fight, especially since you can seldom do any mistakes thanks to, again, Simon's ability to take away your shields, high health, or even down party members as an innate trait. But this is not the end, since he has yet another phase. Now phase 3 is kinda special in that you can skip it if you manage to DPS him down fast enough. It activates when he has 30% health, but if you manage to DPS him down from 30% to 0 before his next turn, he'll just die. So phase 3, what does he do in it? Remember when I said that the phase 3 transition move can remove another layer of safety net that you have? Well, I will just let the move speak for itself. So yeah, as you can see, Simon pretty much removes your entire front line if he manages to successfully transition into phase 3. Yep, just outright removal, with you having to switch to your backline. So you no longer have the safety net of having your backup party members going into phase 3. And note that even if you go with a solo character in phase 1 to 2 and transition into phase 3 with a 3 party member setup, with you technically still having 1 more party member alive in the reserve, you still get a game over if the second party wipes. There is no third lineup to switch to. The game is just programmed that way. You only get the front line and back line, and if you wipe those 2, it's game over, even if you have someone alive. So you pretty much go into phase 3 with no more party members in reserve. This also means that if you are at your backline in phase 2 and you transition into phase 3, you'll pretty much just lose the fight, so that's something. But how about the attack Simon does in phase 3? Does he get any new moves in phase 3? Are they as devastating as Lightspeed? Technically, he doesn't get any new moves in phase 3. He's still got short combo, strong combo, long combo, sword illuminaire, and Lightspeed. He just adds even more modification to the sword after images attack, namely short combo, strong combo, and long combo. The modification being that he adds another sword after image after the first. So instead of 1 after image after Simon slash attacks, it's 2 now. So short combo becomes a 10-hit combo, strong combo becomes a 9-hit combo, and long combo becomes a whopping 18-hit combo. That's a lot of moves to dodge or parry, but the same principle kinda applies as learning those moves in phase 2. You just have to account for another parry after the first after image, and if you manage to learn the timing for the 2 after image parries for a move, you learn it all for all of them. So you just have to be wary of the pure volume of attacks that is coming your way once you get down the after image parries. which can be significant given that a single mistake in this point of the battle can be devastating. So that's the Simon fight in all its entirety. He certainly does a lot. So what do I think of it? I think for the most part, he's a pretty great super boss. Is Simon overwhelming as he is with his kit? Especially with the amount of ways he can reduce your safety nets, as well as how he got combos that feel like he's in an anime fighting game, with you having to properly learn to dodge or parry a 10 to 15 hit combo? Yeah, he can definitely feel overwhelming, especially when you're learning this fight. But I think that's a good thing given that he's Expedition 33 super boss. And not just any super boss, the premier super boss. He's supposed to be the ultimate test of your mastery of the combat system, and I think he does that job incredibly well. Well, let's go through his kit piece by piece again, and I'll tell you what I think of them personally. Firstly, Simon boss mechanics, aka his ability to remove the various safety nets that he can develop for the game, namely shields, revives, high health, and even reserve party members, with how the third phase transition works. For the most part, I think those mechanics are fine. The purpose I feel is to keep you out of your comfort zone and reduce the amount of mistakes you can make in the duration of the fight, and overall makes it a much more strict test of how well you can learn to dodge or parry Simon's moveset. The fact that they have free actions emphasizes the fact that the devs want you to focus squarely on dodging or parrying well in the Simon fight, with it trying its best to mitigate or remove those safety nets when Simon is actively attacking you. Now, is it warranted? Personally, I think it is warranted due to how many safety nets you have at endgame. I mean, you can get like a 5 to 7 shield setup per character at round start if you know what you're doing with the Lumina system. Adding in auto survive or even Luminas that add even more shields to other party members if one character dies, and you got an exceedingly high amount of safety nets to play around with, which can allow you to just face tank through some elite enemies or even bosses at endgame with much relative ease without ever learning their moveset. This is especially true given the game's high damage, which will just allow you to just delete enemies before they even have a chance to go through all the passive defensive shit they got set up, even if you're not using one-shot builds. Now, there isn't anything wrong with playing this way, generally at least. It can be pretty fun to set up a disgusting amount of defensive mechanics around your characters and not worry too much about missing a dodge or parry. Doubly so if you can set it up so that the defensive setup can actually increase your offensive, like with the Lumina that increases your damage depending on how many shields you have up. But this does have an adverse effect on the difficulty and how you play the game, even on expert, which is the difficulty that I am on. It changes the game by making it much more offensive based, with less focus on the game's main active defensive mechanics, i.e. dodging or parrying. There is still great incentive for it via AP gain and counter attacks, but with how much leeway you can get with the game's passive defensive mechanics, as well as how powerful offense is, it does make the focus shift. This is a pretty big contrast from Act 1 and 2, where you were always engaged in parrying and dodging and figuring out the enemy moveset. Yeah, offense was still strong, but it wasn't so overwhelming that it changed the focus of the combat system, which was on its active defensive mechanics. And you didn't have as much passive defensive mechanics that diminished the active defensive mechanics like it does in Act 3. You either dodge or parry well, or you just eat shit in Act 1 or 2, which is a lot of fun since the game was wholly designed on its active defensive mechanics, with you having to learn each enemy moveset and get used to the way you have to parry in those encounters. Simon's innate boss mechanic, I feel, is the game's brute force attempt to try to bring that focus back, of making you have to actively 100% engage with the parrying and dodging, and do it at a high level with a few mistakes. In that regard, I would say they do that job pretty well. Now, it's not 100% effective since one-shot setups still exist, but for the most part, they do a good job of nerfing your safety nets and getting you to engage in the active part of the defensive mechanics. Granted, some more than others. Like the Chromo ability that reduces your HP to 1, I feel that's like a non-factor to me in expert mode. Everything can pretty much already kill you in one hit if you miss time of parry in expert mode, unless you build up your HP to the 9th degree. So the fact that he has an extra action that reduces your HP to 1 is pretty nothing to me. The big game changer is probably shield stealing and player removal. Shields are really strong in this game. The way you can accumulate multiple levels of shields with your Luna setup can make a fight significantly easier, even if you're only okay with your dodge or parry timing. The ability to shrug off an attack or two during an enemy combo string does alleviate a good amount of the difficulty and pressure, with it allowing you to take more hits than you usually can. Heck, you can take more hits doing a shield build than you can with a high HP or high defensive build. Shields is probably your best defensive mechanic for a good amount of the game, with it affording you the ability to make far more mistakes in battle compared to any other passive defensive mechanics you build up in the game. This is not even going into the offensive application that the mechanic has, whether indirectly or even directly. So shields can get pretty bonkers with the right setup and strategy. So I can perfectly see why they make Simon have a mechanic that counter this, for a fight that is supposed to be the penultimate challenge in the game. And not only a mechanic that counters shields, but one that actively helps the boss, with him having all the shield levels that he had previously. Granted, he can only steal one character's shields per turn, but eventually he will get all your shields, with you having to break all the ones he stole from you. So it's a less viable option to have in this particular battle, which does get you to have to be on point with your dodges or parries. Albeit it's done in a brutish kind of way with not much elegance, with you having not much counterplay to it, like the HP chroma thing. But it is what it is, and I can appreciate the game trying to bring the focus back on the active defensive mechanics, which is where the game excels at generally. Now, as for the removing the dead from the canvas mechanic, it can seem overly punishing with how he can just remove down party members, but I'm still kinda okay with it, due to A, down party members in Act 3 doesn't have the same connotation to them as Act 1 and 2, and B, there is some sort of counterplay to it. Now as for A, this point can seem confusing, but all I'm trying to say is that having a down party member is different in Act 3 compared to Act 1 and 2. In Act 1 and 2, it's mostly a disadvantage, as you expect, with you having one less party member to play around with and being one step closer to getting a game over, with you having to spend a turn and resources to get them back up, which can feel significant with how your res items aren't exactly plentiful in the early parts of the game, as well as it costing you a turn, which can set your offense back a bit. In Act 3, being down a party member is still kinda disadvantageous, since you will still have to use resources and a turn to remedy that if you don't have auto revive on them. But it isn't as bad, with it having a few benefits too, since you have a decent amount of Luna that can buff your other party members if one party member goes down, or even debuff enemies. And these buffs or debuffs are pretty significant. It can make a battle go even smoother, even if you do have to use a turn to revive them, like giving your other party members 3 additional shields, giving them more AP, or raise the break bar of all enemies to the maximum, where a single break attack can easily break them. A lot of these buffs or debuffs are powerful, to the point where they can change the tide of battle, even if you have lost a party member. Some of them are even one-time instances like solidifying, which means you can keep activating them if a party member keeps going down. Add in how you got a lot more revive items to play around with Act 3, as well as how using a turn isn't that big of a deal, due to how the cheater picto give characters 2 turns to play around with. And you can see how having a party member down in Act 3 is very different compared to Act 1 and 2, and how it might even be advantageous to you to just take the hit and get a party member to take himself out, just to get the variety of buffs and debuffs you get from being downed. Given that context, I can sort of see why they added a mechanic to Simon that just outright removed down party members at the start of his turn. Now, is it extreme? Yeah, but given it is a super boss that's designed to really test you on how well you can utilize the game's active defense mechanics, I can't say it's not unwarranted. It tethers on the edge between being unfair to fair, with me being on the side that's just okay with it. I do like how it further incentivizes you to actually know what you're doing in regard to dodging and parrying due to how punishing mistakes are now, and I can see why they had to do something like this due to how much buffs and debuffs each death could potentially bring. But I can also see why some people might be turned off by it due to how punishing it really is. Luckily for people on the latter side, there is still some counterplay to it. Namely, making sure Simon doesn't actually have 2 consecutive turns back to back via building up your speed as well as slowing him down with debuffs. Since he can only do his removal mechanic at the start of his turn, that means as long as he doesn't have a turn back to back, you have a chance to bring your ally back on your turn. So given that tidbit, I can't say that I find the removal mechanic too taxing of a mechanic for players overall, at least personally. Lastly, his 3rd phase transition mechanic, the one where he just wipes the front line. Surely this is too punishing of a mechanic to be fair, due to how you can't really defend against it if he does do it. As for my thoughts on it, on one hand, I really think it's cool. I think it's neat that it forces you to use your backline. Simon is the only boss that utilizes the frontline and backline system in an interesting way, with you being forced to finish the battle with your backline, which just get you to plan out your entire lineup instead of just your frontline. The backline system for most of the game is something you don't even have to contend with you only using it in emergencies. So being forced to think of what your backline would be like if you're expecting to experience Phase 3 is interesting. On the other hand, it can be extremely punishing, to the point that it's polarizing. Both for the fact that if you're on the backline when you push to Phase 3, you just wipe, which is kinda bullshit, since you're being punished for progressing through the fight. Albeit in a less than ideal situation, but you at least progress through it, so it doesn't feel great that you're getting punished at that point in the battle. But the more important point of contention for this mechanic is that you can't reinvest in your characters with how the Lumina point system works, i.e. being unable to refund the points you invested in various characters and spraying it around. Like if you hyper invested on 3 characters because you really didn't have to worry about the frontline and backline mechanic for most of the game, you're kinda SOL if you go into the 3rd phase, since you pretty much only have characters that are weakling, which then gets you to have to force to use a one-shot build, which isn't really fun in regards to having a challenging super boss. So yeah, even though I do think Phase 3 is really cool overall, with how you have to contend with another sword after image in its 3 main combos, and how I even like the fact that you have to think of all your lineup when the transition works, the way how it's handled as it is does leave a lot to be desired. I would probably personally change this mechanic to be that he changes the frontline and backline formation, instead of just outright wiping the front line. And maybe give Simon a buff that makes him more resistant to attacks from the party members that were swapped out, so that if you do get swapped back to your original lineup, you would still feel the consequences of the transition attack. That way you actually have to use all your lineup, but it does not overly punish you for playing well in the fight. Also make the Luna point system refundable. But yeah, I know it's been a really long time talking about Simon's mechanics and haven't even discussed my thought on his moves yet, but his innate mechanics really do change a lot on how you face him. For the most part, I do think they are kinda fair given the context that it is the super boss, and these mechanics do the job of getting you into the playstyle that the developers want for this boss. The only unfair aspect is perhaps the Phase 3 transition with how it's executed. Granted, it is a less interesting way to try to emphasize a certain playstyle, since these mechanics essentially brute force you into that way, with there being no interesting counterplay to it, but I do appreciate what the devs are trying to accomplish with these mechanics, in trying to bring back the emphasis on the game's active defensive mechanics. It's just a shame that their solution to that isn't the most graceful or the most interesting. Now let's get into my thoughts about Simon moveset itself. I think overall, each of Simon attacks are pretty fun to learn. I especially think short combo, strong combo, and long combo are the definite highlights of his moveset. They have a satisfying sense of progression from start to finish, as you learn to parry these moves and their sword after image variation in the latter phases. I think what helps them is that they maintain this sense of consistency to them when you are learning them. What I mean by that is that when Simon does these moves in the latter phases, he actually isn't dramatically changing the moves themselves like Duelist does in his phase 2. He's just adding more aspect to those moves. Like his initial movement of short combo, long combo, and strong combo remains the same throughout all the phases, He's just adding a sword after image after each attack, or sword after images in phase 3. This is an important distinction because it makes each of these moves to have a sense of consistency to them, with there being a baseline you need to master before you can move on to the other variation of those moves in the later phases. Like when you learn short, strong, or long combo in phase 1, you have a good foundation on learning how to parry their phase 2 variations. You already know how these moves function at a fundamental level. You just have to get used to the sword after image that accompanies each attack, and same from phase 2 to phase 3, with you just having to get used to another sword after image after the first one. The fact that these moves' later variations retain the same attack structure as their previous iterations, with just some more elements added, make the learning process not only much more easier to digest and fun, but also gives you a great sense of progression, since you're constantly retaining what you learn throughout the fight in regards to those moves, with the game just adding more trickier elements to the formula as the fight goes on. Adding how consistent the parry timings are for every sword after images, and short, long, and strong combo is just a blast to learn in this fight, once you get how it works. I also really like the concept of the sword after images in Simon's fight. It reminds me a lot of how Gaio's cape worked in Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, you had a lot more movement in comparison to 2 and 1, with you being able to roll a lot more in that game. So enemies and bosses were a lot faster, frantic in that game to better utilize that movement. Some people think they took it too far, and I'm not one of those people, and that is not the topic of this video, so I won't talk about it too much. I just want to talk about Gaio. Now, Gaio cape mechanic had an interesting way of testing how you dodge in that fight. Gaio, like Simon, had a few moves where his cape would do a follow-up attack right after an attack. So that made it that you had to be precise in how you dodge. Dodge too early and you're going to get hit by the tail end of the cape animation. And dodge too late and you're just going to eat the attack. Simon's sword after images, I feel, is similar in that regard, in that it's testing on how precise you can be with your parries. You have to be on point enough to parry the after images after the main attack, also not spam the same timing after the sword after images so that you can catch the next main attack that Simon does in his combo, since there is a slight delay. This makes it that you have to count how many sword after images you have to parry after each of his main attack in his combo, which is an interesting way to test on how precise you are with your parries, with it being immensely satisfying when you pull it off consistently. I feel like the combo that exceptionally exemplifies this is probably Simon's long combo, particularly between his 4th and 5th main sword strike. You need to particularly be precise and count how many sword after images or sword attacks you're dealing with, or you're going to get hit, either by getting hit by the 6th main hit if you try to spam the same parry timing without accounting for the delay on the 6th hit, or you're going to get wrecked by the 4th and 5th main attack if you don't know the sword after image parry timing. I say that this particular part is of note due to how fast that part of the combo is, as well as the sheer volume of attacks you're dealing with. There really isn't any breathing room between the 4th to 6th main attack and their after images, which really does emphasize the need for precise parries in that part. But man, when you pull it off, is it ever so gratifying. And luckily, this alongside short and strong combo is still a lot of fun to learn, and it's pretty much the best part of Simon's moveset to interact with directly. But those aren't the only moves in his arsenal. He also technically has 3 more moves we can talk about. One move that's phase 1 exclusive, and 2 moves that he does in phase 2 and 3. As for the phase 1 exclusive move, the one he plants his sword on the ground, not much to say. The first 2 hits come out a bit faster than you would think, based on the animation, but it's something you can get used to very quickly after seeing it the first time. Nothing to write home about. As for the other 2 moves, Sword of Luminaire is a pretty cool move to parry. I think it's really neat how the first 2 moves have a visual indicator that lets you know when to parry it. It's a pretty unique visual indicator too, so it is satisfying when you figure out the trick to parrying the first 2 moves. The rest you can pretty much eyeball as well as hear the usual audio cues to properly dodge or parry it, so it's not too bad. It has a neat visual indicator that is cool to figure out, and it being a 7-hit combo makes it a challenging enough move to parry for a super boss. Now for Lightspeed. I already said before that Lightspeed is a handful when I was describing the move, but it is a pretty extreme move. so extreme that I would say that it's probably a tad overtuned. Not only is it a 10-hit combo, it also is a party-wide move, both the visual and audio indicator being lightning fast to catch. The parry timing is all over the place, so you can't really get into good rhythm into it, with you having to pretty much rely on trial and error, with some moves coming a lot faster in one section, and another section where it comes slower than the initial part, which can screw with your timing. And lastly, the weird pauses can also make you think that the move is over when it's actually not. This move is pretty hard to learn, and when you fail to properly dodge a parry, it can result in a party wipe, which is devastating. I think the fact that it's such a hard and complex move to learn, as well as it being a party-wide move, makes Lightspeed to be extreme overkill, even for the game's premier super boss. Especially considering the fact that you also have to deal with Simon's other mechanics too. If this move was single target and Sword of Luminaire was the party-wide one, I would probably be fine with it. Now, I don't have an inherent problem with Lightspeed being complex to learn. I do think it's a lot of fun to try to figure out how a complex set of moves work with you having to figure out ways to counter it. I do have a problem though with how it's both the most complex move to learn as well as the deadliest move to whiff against. The fact that you just wipe if you don't dodge it properly makes the move so much more infuriating to learn, since you pretty much have to start the fight all over again in order to have another chance to properly learn it. It's already the hardest move to learn out of all Simon moveset. You don't need to make it this punishing, even for a super boss. So if there is a slight on Simon's design, it is Lightspeed with how it currently works. Well, that and how the phase 3 transitions work. But besides those two problems, is there anything else that I don't like about the fight? Well, this is a personal thing, but I do think phase 3 being skippable and you have enough DPS to delete Simon from 40% to 0 is unfortunate. Now, I do have my grievances with how the transition move works. I do think they are legitimate grievances, but I think phase 3 itself is still really cool. The way how the music crescendos into its third bombastic iteration, seeing the entire background being enveloped by this red hue, the way you have to contend with another sword after image when dealing with short, long, and strong combo, the way you're forced into your backline with feeling like this is the last desperate push. This is all cool stuff, even if the frontline and backline situation isn't entirely fair. So it's a shame that you can skip it, but with how the phase 3 transition works currently and how it's not an entirely fair mechanic, I can't really say capping the damage and forcing you to experience phase 3 is the way to go. It's just really lamentable how iffy it is to get to phase 3, with this probably being the biggest slight against the fight itself. Phase 3 stuff is hella cool, and I do think it's worth experiencing. That phase 3 transition move just leaves a lot to be desired and just brings down the entire fight, at least with how it's executed. Overall, I think Simon is a really good super boss for Expedition 33. He has a complex moveset that's interesting to learn, well, for the most part, and I really do like how his innate mechanics not only change how you approach the fight compared to the other Act 3 post-game bosses, but I think it also re-emphasizes the active defensive part of the combat system, which is cool since that is the best part of the combat system. Learning how the boss moves during his combo chain and reacting accordingly, there being a thin line of error, it makes the fight feel tense and engaging for all of it. And it's a feeling that sadly lost a bit at the post-game, where you got so many safety nets with your Lumina setup. Granted, the way how they try to refocus the active defensive part of the combat system by simply removing your safety nets is not the most graceful of solutions, but I do appreciate what they try to do, and I do think it does make the fight to be one of the most intense and gripping encounters in the game. It really does make you feel like you master the combat mechanics, when you're able to perfectly dodge or parry all of Simon attacks, with most of the safety nets off. Now, it's not the perfect super boss. Lightspeed is still a bit overtuned for what it is, and the phase 3 transition move does hamper the experience, to the point where it can convince people to just try to skip phase 3 altogether, rather than try to experience it, which is a crying shame. But in the end, I would say that Simon is a really fun super boss, and is a great final test for Expedition 33's combat system. Anyway, that's all for this video today. Hope you guys enjoy it, and let me know what you think of the Simon fight. This is Cyrus from Cyrus Gaming Spot, signing off.